This question of should we even call them AI art generators has been sitting with me since last summer when I started using MidJourney. I found that thinking about platforms like dall-e and MidJourney very fascinating. There's tons of controversy about how and if artists should use them, how should we train these machines, all of this, and I think some of it is misguided, and many focus on the lack of consent from artists who have a particular style for their images to be used in the training of these algorithms. For me, that's not as big a deal, and I'll get to that in a moment. To me, this just highlights how much better the machine is at generating images and categorizing them than us. We're afraid of the speed and the manner in which they can produce images faster than artists who use traditional techniques. But this has literally always been the thing that artists wrestle with when a new technology comes out. That's exactly what happened with the camera. It happened with film and video, all the digital tools of Photoshop and Illustrator and Corel Draw, and now Procreate constantly ask the question of, are the traditional techniques valuable, or does the new technology and the speed at which it can accomplish the same things make the old obsolete? Those aren't really my concerns. And before we jump into my concerns, I just want to go through and think about what exactly is an AI art generator doing. Basically, it's reducing an image or category of images into certain elements. It judges these elements based on human input. So the computer is very good at reducing an image to its most important part, but it doesn't know it. Calling it intelligence is foolish. It's a simplification of what's happening. The computer is trying to account for what an image is. It's merely measuring the mean of a data set, as in the average thing. If you put it in cat and it produces 4 images for you, it derives a data set based on which one you think is the most cat-like. And it learns a little bit more what an image of a cat looks like. That is literally stupid, as in that is not intelligence. Intelligence does not account for what is the important form. Intelligence determines the important form. These generators are uncaring, detached, nihilistic. They do not associate meaning with any of the imagery. Rather, they rely upon a human being's ability to understand meaning in order to choose or to decide on how to generate a thing. It requires actual intelligence to tell how to value the human data. Therefore, it's not an artificial intelligence. It is a very fast image generator that uses aggregate data sets that are derived from human input to tell what is the most expected and important features of images from particular categories. So, is that art? Is it making art? How much does the process of the creation of an image matter? How can we even begin to answer this question of whether or not it's art if we don't have some inkling as to what art is? I find that the answer to that question really depends on what someone's definition is. Let's look at several definitions of art because that's changed over time. The first is sort of art as craft. There was a time when craftsmanship was king. This is where we get ideas of art as the highest form of a craft. The best paintings, like those of John Singer Sargent, are considered art. From this definition of art, you can get things like the art of tea making or the art of motorcycle maintenance. But also, bad things can become art. The art of war, the art of murder. Personally, I think this limits art in weird ways, as in, you have to be the best in your field to actually accomplish art, and it opens it up in weird ways. You can become the most artistic murderer, like Hannibal Lecter. This leads one to think of things in merely aesthetic craft sense rather than use or meaning, and that disturbs me. The idea that the skills and creativity that I'm implementing in my artistic endeavor is the same skills and creativity judged in the same manner as someone who's developing the gas chambers at Auschwitz. I personally find that definition quite troublesome, but many people still hold by it. If you stand by this definition, certainly the image generated is headed towards high art. It will one day reach a craft level that will outpace humans. What about art as a sacred thing? This can be sort of seen as art is serving the right purpose. This is obviously religious art, art that espouses the proper theological views. But this is also art of royalty, art that depicts the king properly. Even activist art falls into this category of, does this artwork put the relationship between, say, humans and crude oil in the right place? Does it purport that the environment is the thing that we should serve the most? This is all good until we question the nature of the original purpose. In the case of the religious art, is the religion true? Or in the case of the royal art, do we really need kings or queens? Or let alone what happens when an artwork fails to enact change if you have activist artwork? Is your artwork a failure because the pipeline was still built or the king died? All of this artwork that serves a sacred purpose is also very narrow. And on top of that, destined to be outpaced by time as our goals and values as human beings and as a society shifts away from the sacred purposes for which the art was intended. The image generator could certainly make images that align with the purposes of different ideologies or religions. But if we look at contemporary art, we can see that no one really knows how to answer this question very well. What is art today is a confounding question. Art can be made of anything and about anything. Duchamp really did us in with that urinal. He was seeking objects for his ready-mades that the public would be indifferent to, things that would be unnoticeable, and yet everyone noticed them. Everyone acted like what he did meant something. They might not have known what it meant, but they knew it meant something. This has been the struggle throughout the past century. Duchamp pointed out that when you do the thing that an artist does, it seems to imply that the object becomes meaningful. And so we can have the banana taped to the wall, we can have an invisible sculpture, we can have a composition of music that is all rests, all because somehow humans are finding meaning in artworks. But this actually gives us a pretty good operating definition. It tells us what human beings are doing when they look at an artwork. Artworks are objects that become vessels for meaning. Objects become meaningful in a whole host of manners, though. Take the field at Gettysburg. Humans have filled that field with meaning because of an actual event that took place there. Or your favorite childhood toy or blankie or whatever. It's meaningful to you because of the lived history with that object. To me, it's just another toy or another blankie. Or take a hammer, a tool, for example. It is meaningful because of how you can use it. If you're looking for your keys to start your car, you don't see the hammer on the tabletop because it's not meaningful to you in that moment. Its meaning is based on only its use. Artworks are made meaningful not through actual fact or use, but through artifice. That is, artworks are artificially constructed vessels of meaning. Art seems to be when humans notice artificial meaning. On top of this definition, we can know that it is a unique perspective of a human to see something as art. It's best said by George Saunders in his book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. I'm going to quote an extended passage from it because it's such a perfect encapsulation of what is happening in artist studios, whether they be musicians or poets or authors or visual artists. We are going through some process that is more accurately described in this way. So, from Saunders' book, this is page 129. We often discuss art this way. The artist had something he wanted to express, and then he just, expressed it. That is, we buy into some version of the intentional fallacy, that notion that art is about having a clear-cut intention and then confidently executing same. The actual process, in my experience, is much more mysterious and beautiful, and more of a pain in the ass to discuss truthfully. A guy, Stan, constructs a model railroad town in his basement. Stan acquires a small hobo, places him under a plastic railroad bridge, near that fake campfire, then notices that he's arranged his hobo into a certain posture. The hobo seems to be gazing back at the town. Why is he looking over there? At that little blue Victorian house. Stan notes a plastic woman in the window, then turns her a little, so she's gazing out, over at the railroad bridge, actually. Suddenly, Stan has made a love story. Oh, why can't they be together? If only little Jack would just go home, to his wife, to Linda. What did Stan, the artist, just do? Well, first, surveying his little domain, he noticed which way his hobo was looking. Then, he chose to change that little universe by turning the plastic woman. Now, Stan didn't exactly decide to turn her. it might be more accurate to say that it occurred to him to do so in a split second with no accompanying language, except maybe a very quiet internal yes. He just liked it better that way, for reasons he couldn't articulate, and before he had the time or inclination to articulate them. In my view, all art begins in that instant of intuitive preference. I love the fact that Saunders points out that an object becomes art when a human notices that it might be meaningful. There's this piece of art by Francis Alise called The Night Watch. If you watch the fox closely throughout the piece, you see that the fox does not see the artwork, literally. It becomes a part of the environment. The fox sees the paintings as walls. Humans move through the gallery differently. Humans move through as if the objects have meaning. They see it as art. Art is the human activity of noticing artificial meaning. By the way, you don't have to agree with this definition, but this definition can explain the banana as well as the Sistine Chapel. It's a functional definition for what we're doing now. Some might disagree with it. Some might say this isn't what it should be, but this is a way to explain what's happening in galleries right now. So let's get back to the original question. Can these image generators generate art? Again, this means that yes, the generators can make art. Humans can notice art in the images they create, but they are not the art generator. The human gaze is. Calling them AI artworks is foolish because it implies that 1, the computer is intelligent. 2, its intelligence is like ours in that it can understand meaning. And 3, the images are art because they emulate past artworks. None of these things are true. They are algorithmic image generators. They are a tool for making images quickly that conforms to a set of categorizations. They actually operate just like human image generating processes, but they're faster at it. They look at the past and remix it. And I would be remiss to point out Kirby Ferguson's video series, Everything is a Remix. Check that out if you want to get more about this idea that all we're doing as human beings is remixing the past. So if we can see what they make as art, should artists use these tools? There are many reasons to object to these tools. The prime one is the fact that they are outpacing the artists they source. There have been some artists that when you Google search their work, their original artwork is lost in the sea of machine-generated images, which reminds me of a book by Marshall McLuhan called The Mechanical Bride. In that book, he explores the implications of mass communication technologies and their use for advertising. As the title suggests, he's fearful that we might marry the mechanical bride instead of real ones. Similarly, in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein's monster, this idea of man being able to create his own life would effectively make the woman obsolete. If man can make a child on his own, he doesn't need the woman. Via gadgets and technology, man will be able to replace his need for the opposite sex. In fact, women will be able to replace men. There have been many calls by feminists today to do so. The mechanical bride can also be the mechanical groom. Advertising purports that technology can replace a spouse. Technology can be a companion, a pleasure, a homemaker, etc. Need I remind you of the Joaquin Phoenix role in the movie Her? He truly has a mechanical bride. So when we're thinking about this technology, we need to think about, does this tool have a good cost-benefit ratio? As in, what do we gain and what do we lose? Every technology extends a human capability, but it usually causes an atrophy of whatever muscle was used before. The Olympics are a great example of this. There's very few people who can keep throwing the javelin because we have guns now. Most people don't take the time to learn how to train with the javelin, so much so that they can hit buffalo from 100 feet away, because now we have a gun to do it, and our arms are literally weaker because of it. Plato even gets at this with the technology of the book. I've mentioned this before in an earlier video, but he says in the Phaedrus that books will cause us to lose our memory. You won't remember what you believe because
Take a look, it's in a book.
he argued that you should only write in a manner that stimulated your memory when you are old and begin to forget things. Books should be reminders of what you have come to know. We certainly do not do that. We now have all knowledge on our phone. You don't need to remember much unless you don't have internet. You have this device that is so powerful. But have you ever decided to not go somewhere because you would lose connectivity? I remember the explosion of remote working in the boondockers through the summer of 2020 and how they mapped out where they could get good cell phone signals. Their life of freedom on the road in an RV would be constrained to the Verizon cell phone service map. They are free in one sense, but they're restricted in another. The tech is powerful, but with strings attached. The book is very powerful. Plato didn't even know. He didn't know the printing press was coming. So what power do algorithmic image generators give us, and what muscle of ours would atrophy? Well, it offloads our creativity and imagination. What we get is an onslaught of entertaining images. The artist who uses the AIG might speed up their ideation phase, but they might atrophy their own skills in that phase. They might forget how to begin generating images. That is the artistic process of exploration as mentioned by Saunders earlier, that noticing and feeling. Imagine that story without the embodied human there, without the model railroad train set, without the love story. What that Stan created was a unique, novel story of some hobo under the bridge looking back at Linda. That's a unique arrangement that he might not have thought of if he just said to an image generator, give me a love story. He might have even been a little more specific. Give me a love story between a hobo and a housewife. But would he have had all the details that he found and noticed in the world? In fact, the story that Saunders gives us is a story of a man who doesn't know that he's about to make a love story. Whereas when you work with these AIGs, you have to know what you want beforehand. You have to have an intention. Whereas the creative practice that Saunders purports and that I teach in my classes is not about having an intention, but rather noticing something meaningful emerging out of the materials you surround yourself with. You can probably still notice something interesting when using these applications, but it relies on so much technology that you'd be unable to help atrophying unless you're very mindful. And then, to me, this starts to get at the real hellscape that reliance on AIG technology would produce. Imagine TikTok or Instagram Reels, but you no longer need content creators. Instead, a supercomputer that knows in aggregate what humans like to see, generating images and videos at an unimaginable pace. There's this story of one of the AI Jeopardy robots being asked questions, and they did a test to see if humans would trust the robot. They found that if the robot didn't have a blinking light, as if it were thinking, that people didn't trust the answer because it gave the answer so much faster than any human could imagine possible. We are so human that we don't understand computers. Computers can process data so much faster and specifically than us that we don't recognize it because we see things through a human lens. We don't understand computers, and that is why marketers have called it AI, artificial intelligence. It's not an intelligence at all. What it could produce in this terrible possibility is a Wall-E-esque hellscape, a constant source of entertainment with no need for an artist to generate the content. In the past, folks have said that the workforces that are threatened by automation should learn to code. ChatGPT will code better than us. The technology is better at any single skill, but it cannot assign value. This is where I'm hopeful and fearful. Humans give things meaning. We are the cup that pours out what we contain. We perceive the meaning in things. The fox in the gallery doesn't. The code in the machine doesn't. We are the perceivers of meaning. If we lose the skills of noticing meaning and exerting our will over our domain to make these potentials real, will we lose the ability altogether? This question makes me think of Wendell Berry and his poem Manifesto, The Mad Farmer Liberation Front. I'll read just a few lines from it. Your mind will be punched in a card and shut away in a little drawer. When they want you to buy something, they will call you. When they want you to die for profit, they will let you know. So, friends, every day, do something that won't compute. As soon as the generals and politicos can predict the motions of your mind, lose it. Leave it as a sign to mark the false trail, the way you didn't go. Be like the fox, who makes more tracks than necessary, some in the wrong direction. Practice resurrection. When an artist finds the dead matter of dirt at the bottom of a river, he pulls it from the mud. He throws it on a wheel and spins it in circles. He feels the mud, now made into clay, with his hands and puts himself in the way of its circular flow. The artist becomes the rock in the middle of a stream. His hand forces the earthen material to move past him until the potter has formed a suitable vessel. For what? For it to contain something, for it to contain meaning. Algorithmic image generators can become a new tool, a new potter's wheel, but only if we are careful. Otherwise, it might be more than just a mechanical bride. It might become our mechanical imagination.